Was the wine and alcohol in biblical times comparable to the wine and alcohol of today? That's question number one. Let me give it to you again, those who are writing it down. Was the wine and alcohol in biblical times comparable to the wine and alcohol of today? Any Christian or biblical discussion on the use of alcohol must understand that there was a significant difference between the alcohol and the wine and the drinks that were used in the Bible and the wine and the alcohol that we have in our modern society. Let me share with you just a few of the significant differences. And again, if you're taking notes, you can write them down. Major significances between the wine and alcohol of biblical times compared to the wine and alcohol of today. Significant reason number one, wine of the biblical era had a much lower alcohol content. Wine and alcohol in biblical and ancient times had a much lower alcohol content. Wines in biblical times are estimated to have been from, and there's variances obviously, it's why the Bible talks about various levels of wine and alcohol in the Bible. Let me give you an example of that. In the Old Testament, there are 11 Hebrew words that we translate as wine and alcohol in a modern English Bible. That's right. In the Old Testament, there are 11 different Hebrew words that are just translated in a modern Bible as wine or alcohol or drink. And then in the New Testament, which is Greek, there are 5 words that are translated simply in our Bibles as wine. But in the original languages, both of Hebrew and Greek, there were levels of definition that we simply do not have in modern English Bibles. And so you understanding what I'm about to teach you is significant in the debate of alcohol and social drinking in the modern church. Wine in biblical times was commonly, as far as alcoholic content, 7 to 10%. Now here's another important thing of history that's very pertinent to this discussion. They lived in a culture of agriculture. They didn't have grocery stores, they didn't have freezers, they didn't have refrigeration, they didn't have all of the modern appliances that we have. And so everything in this era of time, in biblical times, that was raised, including the fruit of the vine, they had to protect it and preserve it. And so because they didn't have distilleries and they didn't have modern appliances and they didn't have refrigeration, once they began to store the grape juice from the fruit of the vine, with time the natural sugar content would begin to ferment. But the wine that they used most commonly for family consumption at meals was 7 to 10% in alcoholic content. Now, the other thing that you need to understand is that wine was not usually shared at a meal in that natural state. By contrast, modern breweries and distilleries produce table wines, fortified wines, hard liquors that are minimally around 14%, oftentimes 18 to 24%, harder drinks 40 to 50%, and where I was born in West Virginia, where they make their own moonshine, and other parts of the world, it's far beyond 40 to 50% proof. Number two, ancient wine, as I already mentioned, commonly was somewhere around 7+% in alcoholic content. But they didn't drink it straight. It was always, hear me, it was always diluted with water. Ancient wine was diluted before consumption. Write that down. The wine and the alcohol that you're reading of in the scripture was not like modern wine, not like modern alcohol, not like hard liquors that we have today. Wine that was used in family consumption, even in festivities, was about 7+% in alcoholic volume, and it was always diluted before consumption. The ancient records of both the Greeks and the Jews wrote of diluting wine to avoid intoxication. Drinking unmixed wine that was not diluted, forget the Christian culture, forget the Jewish culture, the secular Greeks in their ancient writings wrote about it being barbaric to drink wine that had not been diluted with water. Now, what was the dilution ratio? Again, as you delve into deep study on this, you're going to find that there are multiple references, but the common average was 3-to-1. 3 parts water, 1 part wine, that wine being around 7% or so in alcoholic content. When it was mixed 3 parts water, you can see that it would have been almost impossible to be inebriated or intoxicated by drinking even several glasses of that with a meal. In Homer's Odyssey, they diluted, it's referenced there, 8-to-1. In Pliny's Natural, 20-to-1. And so it varied as to how much it was diluted. But the common wine in biblical times after dilution, listen carefully. When you are reading about wine in the Bible, most often, now again, 11 Hebrew words, 5 Greek words, 16 different original language from original manuscript words that are typically only translated as wine or fresh wine or new wine or strong drink in the Bible. And so our modern English Bible does not really give us the depth of understanding as to what was being consumed in a casual reading of Scripture. But the common alcoholic content after being diluted in biblical times, and scholars almost across the board that are reputable agree, it was somewhere between 2 and 2.75% alcoholic. That's right. The common wine most referenced in the Bible was only 2, after dilution, 2 to 2.75% alcohol. Now, by our own modern standards, to be a legal alcoholic beverage, it has to be 3.2% or higher. And so that's why you have things like near beer and non-alcoholic wines, etc. As long as a company producing beverages keeps the alcoholic content under 3.2%, they don't have to even legally call it alcohol. And so by modern standards, what they were drinking at the table was not even considered an alcoholic beverage. By today's legal standards, what they were drinking in the Bible was not even alcoholic in content by a modern standard. Number 3, the distillation process for liquors had not even been invented, let alone developed. Distillation that produces modern alcoholic beverages with an alcohol content of 40% and much higher was not even invented until the Middle Ages. And so hard liquor, as we understand hard liquor today, was totally unknown in biblical times. So strong drink in the Bible is not talking about something like a Jack Daniels or some type of whiskey or scotch. I grew up in a home where drinking was never tolerated, so pardon my vocabulary being limited. But you understand what I'm talking about. Hard liquor, as we have available to us today in common grocery stores, was not available in biblical times. Number 4, we're talking about the significant differences between the wine and alcohol discussed in the Bible and comparing it to modern times. So when ministers or pastors or teachers open up the Bible and they're trying to make an argument for drinking alcohol in moderation, if they're not discussing the radical differences between the wine and the alcohol of biblical times compared to modern times, then you're missing a significant part of the application of their teaching, because you're not comparing apples to apples. You're comparing two things that are worlds apart. Fourthly, diluted wine was necessary in biblical times. It was not just a matter of pleasure or for festivals. Wine was necessary in their culture. Why? Because, again, of the primitive nature of flowing water and sewage and the dispersing of sewage in villages and towns and communities, etc., water sources were always polluted. And so they had problems with common bacterias and parasites, and we don't have to deal with that. Even though our modern water that comes through our faucets and through our taps is maybe not the healthiest water on the face of the earth, it has been infused with various chemicals and chlorine and various fluoride. I mean, depending on the city where you're at, the water that comes through your tap has been in an attempt to be made as safe as possible. And in most towns and communities and major cities in America, you can drink water out of the tap without having a health risk. Now, that's not so when you go to many countries, and I'll not mention countries by name because I don't want to offend people, but many people from America and from North America who have gone on vacation, and not to third world countries. They've stayed at 5-star and 4-star hotels, and they've made the mistake of drinking water out of the tap, or they brought you a glass of water at the restaurant that wasn't bottled water or purified water. You found out very quickly that the same problems they had in biblical and ancient times still exist today. That was, listen carefully, this is incredibly important, don't miss it. That was the primary use of preserving the fruit of the vine. The slight fermentation process killed Giardia, Cryptosporium, parasites, bacteria, and helped to make their drinking water safe. Very simply stated, I'll state it again, don't miss it, because this is perhaps one of the most centralized points concerning the debate in the modern church when it comes to alcohol, wine, beer, and social drinking. The wine, the alcohol, the common drinks of ancient times, of biblical times, cannot be compared to the alcoholic beverages that we have in modern times. Again, wine commonly 7% alcohol content, but always diluted. Most commonly 3-to-1, sometimes as high as 20-to-1. But common, in the research that I've done through the years, most scholars come back to a figure around 3-to-1. 3 parts water, 1 part wine. The wine mixed in the water primarily was medicinal. It was not used for social drinking. It was used to keep them healthy and to keep their kids from getting sick and people having serious stomach disorders. We read about its medicinal qualities in the parable of the Good Samaritan, the wounded traveler. There by the side of the road, his wounds were treated with oil and wine. The wine was used as an antiseptic. And so wine in the Bible was not the party wines and the pretty wines that we often have in modern culture. It was used primarily as a medicinal application. Alcoholic beverages today are an optional recreational beverage. What do you mean by that, Tiff? I am telling you that in the Bible days, having wine and alcohol to treat water as a part of their medicinal purposes, etc., it was necessary then. I am telling you that in modern society and in the modern church, alcoholic beverages are an optional beverage. You cannot, regardless of your position on either side of the debate of social drinking in the modern church, you cannot make a case that alcohol is a necessity. It simply is not. There are all kinds of beverages available to you that are healthy and much more healthy, far more healthy than any type of wine, beer, alcohol. It's not a necessity in the modern church. People that do it are doing it for recreational reasons. I'll come back to that. And unfortunately, the alcohols and the drinks and the wines that are available to us today are far more potent. And don't miss this, much more addictive. It is historically and hermeneutically misleading to suggest that people using wine in Bible times is a justifiable reason for Christians using wine, beer, and alcohol today. I'm going to say that again. After everything that I have taught you in the last several minutes, what is evidence that is undeniable is that the use of alcohol today and using the Bible to justify its use is a violation of hermeneutics and a violation of proper interpretation of Scripture. Let's move to question number 2. Does the Bible promote the health benefits of using wine or using alcohol in moderation?
Về vị trí cân bằng. Như vậy chúng ta trả lời tại thời điểm ban đầu vật ở vị trí có ly độ cộng A, tức là bằng 40 cm đó, và chuyển động về vị trí cân bằng ngược chiều dương. Đúng không ạ? Ngược chiều dương. Đúng chưa? Các bạn chờ thầy chút nha. Rồi, đó là xong nội dung cái câu A của mình. Bây giờ chúng ta qua câu B nè. Biên độ chu kỳ tần số dao động của con lắc. Thì nhìn vào đây các bạn thấy biên độ là độ lệch cực đại của nó, đúng không? Nó lệch vị trí này lớn nhất, vị trí dưới này cũng là lớn nhất. Như vậy biên độ nó là bằng 40 cm. Chu kỳ là đi từ vị trí cân bằng đi từ vị trí biên dương về vị trí cân bằng đó thì là 1/4 chu kỳ, như nãy giờ thầy đã nói rồi. Thời gian đi từ đây đến đây nè, từ vị trí biên dương đi về vị trí cân bằng đi xuống nè, tới vị trí cân bằng là 1/4 chu kỳ. Như vậy chúng ta có 1/4 chu kỳ bằng cái thời gian đi từ đây đến đây là 1 giây. Như vậy từ đây suy ra chu kỳ bằng 4 x 1 là 4 giây. Đúng chưa? 4 x 1 là 4 giây. Rồi, đó là xong nội dung cái chu kỳ. Còn tần số thì các bạn tính ngược lại thôi. Nó là nghịch đảo của chu kỳ. 1/4 nó là 0,25 Hz. Đúng không ạ? Rồi, tiếp tục chúng ta qua pha ban đầu. Pha ban đầu thì bắt buộc các em phải dựa vào điều kiện ban đầu. Đúng chưa? Điều kiện ban đầu vật đang ở vị trí cân bằng đi về, vị trí biên dương đi về vị trí cân bằng đây. Như vậy chúng ta mở đường tròn lượng giác ra. Đây là vị trí O, đây là vị trí biên dương đi về vị trí cân bằng. Đúng chưa? Vậy ban đầu nó nằm đây, vậy góc chỗ này pha ban đầu